Hello. It's been a minute since I've done long form content like this. I've gotten used to short form videos that I've been doing on TikTok and Instagram, but a mentor of mine had a really good idea to go back to long form videos specifically for cultural commentary. So I'm going to do that with the books that I've been reading. I read a lot of nonfiction, and it's very rare that I do read fiction, but if I'm going to read fiction, it's because the author is phenomenal, which makes today's conversation timely. So today I'm going to be talking about Tar Baby by Toni Morrison, talking about some of the themes that I explored, some of the musings that I have from listening to an interview in which she speaks about the novel pretty soon after the novel was released, and weaving them together to do my review. So without further ado, the Tar Baby story. So I want to situate this novel by first talking about where the concept of Tar Baby even comes from. The Tar Baby tale is best known from the Uncle Remus stories, collected and published in the late 19th century and immortalized in the 1946 Disney animated movie Song of the South. In the story, Brer Fox makes a baby out of tar in order to trap his longtime adversary, Brer Rabbit. Despite being part of an African American folklore, the title came to be used as a racial slur used against Black people. I think that's really interesting because with that context, you already are starting to get an idea of some of the things that you're going to encounter in this novel. If it's not clear which of these themes are really going to ring true, I would say the biggest thing is going to be racial relations, and that is something that I will talk about throughout this review. So I actually listened to a interview that Toni did with Studs Turkle Radio. I actually don't know if it was Studs Turkle Radio or if this is just where the interview is archived, but the interview is from April 11th, 1981, 2 days after my birthday. And it's really fascinating. Toni is having a really active discussion about what's in the novel and where some of the concepts in the novel came from as well. On top of it just being really beautiful to hear her talk about the work, it was honestly really nice to hear her voice. It's so melodic and so beautiful, and it made for a very easy listening experience. For the review, a whirlwind of a story, and one that requires deep reflections and lessons that I believe will stay with me for life. Tar Baby is the perfect synthesis of racial relations, expat culture, folklore, and a lingering question that explores what home means. This was my first experience with a Toni Morrison novel, and I found myself nervous to dive into her world, fearful of friends and internet commentators who often discuss her writing style as difficult to understand, with sentences that require you to read them multiple times before the weight of their words take root. And while I relate to the latter, I think the former is far from true. So I want to pause there because this was my first Toni Morrison novel, and I actually made a video a few weeks ago that brought up the question of if Toni Morrison was mean. It was influenced by a thread that I saw on Threads in which people were debating which feminist Black scholars were mean and which were not mean, and I share my own experience with bell hooks, but part of the conversation really pushed me to be like, okay, like I need to dive into Toni Morrison's work. Like there's no reason I don't have more of her collection in my own knowledge. And so the first book I chose was Tar Baby. So I think it was a really interesting experience reading it because I had heard so many mixed reviews of people being like, if you're a beginner reader, don't read Toni Morrison. If you're not ready to like really expand your vocabulary, don't read Toni Morrison. And I got my undergraduate degree in African American studies, so those are not words that should have scared me, but I think because I saw it repeated so many times on the internet, it did scare me a little bit. And I mean, there's so much to say about that too, because as a Black woman, it doesn't feel foreign to me to read these concepts from Black women because they inherently make sense. And so that's a completely different discussion that I will not dive into in this video. So we'll keep going. Her writing leaves room for the reader to explain themes and tropes as they directly relate to one's own life. As I watched class conflicts between the Black characters in the novel, I thought of my own upbringing, the weight of the hard R, and the idea that someone who looks like me could ever be less than based on their access to education, economic stability, and the teacher that his worldly experiences, which is explicitly called out in an interview with Toni about the story, particularly the idea of the Philadelphia Negro and the idea that Sydney, character in the book, and Ondine, another character in the book, should have been in charge of firing Mary and Gideon, both people who are also in the book. This uppity approach comes to a head when Valerian, the head of the house, attempts to put Sun, Sydney, and Undine in their place. The same stuck-up behavior is obvious in their failure to learn the actual names of Yardman and the woman who often visits. So I've just named a lot of characters to give more context. Sydney and Undine are the house servants of Valerian, who is the head of the house, is white, and is from Philadelphia. Sydney is also from Philadelphia, and part of what Toni talks about in that radio interview is Sydney's own way of referencing himself as a Philadelphia Negro. So this idea that he comes from a different caliber, he is more knowledgeable, he is more renowned. He is not the typical Black man in comparison to Sun, which is another character in the novel, a pretty central character, who has basically spent the past few years of his life going from place to place, really looking for a place to call home, mainly because he is escaping some events that happened in his own home, and in the process ends up intruding on Valerian's home. And they make this distinction between Sydney and Sun, and that Sun is more of the hard R, for lack of a better word, whereas Sydney is, again, this refined Black man. Like, he is not the same Black man, and despite them both being Black, there is this exception of someone who is better. So that idea of less than, to me, really came through because I think it still exists today, and it was just so jarring, honestly, to read the novel because there were a lot of references to different Black folks in the novel as being less than and using really hard language to describe them because they are not seen as the same caliber. And that brings me to that second point about Yardman and Mary, both people who are really integral to the way that Valerian's home runs, but because they are seen as less than, they are natives of the island, they are not given the grace of folks actually remembering their name until Sun comes into the picture. So Yardman's name is Gideon, and typically Yardman is just described as like Yardman and the woman that comes with him, and her name is Mary. I thought it was quite jarring to see how frequently Sydney, Undine, and Jadine refer to the other Black folks around them as hard R's. It's chilling and a reminder that class consciousness within the Black community has long been at odds. Again, this idea of which Black is better and the attributes that lend themselves to that bettering. And as my mind continues to race, I'm still in awe at the worlds Morrison builds with her words. Words I've never heard nor seen to describe love, conflict, and guilt become a gentle massage for my brain as I continue to refine my own writing style and become the student of those who have long mastered the skill of refining language. My favorite comes in the following quote to describe budding love. Together, they could not concentrate on the given world. They reinvented it, remembered it through the other. That specific quote comes from the explanation of Sun's relationship with Jadine. So Jadine is the niece of Sydney and Undine. I think her mother passed away when she was younger, and she then moved to France, had this huge career there, was a model, got, really educated, was seen as this Black woman who could fit in with the white upper class, and she finds herself in this moment where she's potentially going to have an interracial marriage, and she gets scared, essentially, and comes home being this island where Sydney and Undine are now waiting on Valerian. They still were waiting on him in Philadelphia, but now it's in the island context. And so this quote is super relevant to the relationship that Jadine builds with Sun, because when she initially meets him, she sees him as vulgar. She honestly uses language that likens him to being beast or animal-like, and she wants nothing to do with him. And eventually they fall in love, and that was interesting in itself. But I think this quote really specifies how they lean on each other and how they are building their own form of love. Imagine a love so powerful and all-encompassing that the world passes you by as you continue to make your own, that it's both dependent and grounded in one another. Morrison's writing style was also my first time experiencing dialogue that doesn't explicitly state when the conversation has switched to a different character. The dialogue flows almost like a run-along sentence, forcing you to keep up with the conversation or get left behind. That kind of goes into a different narrative as far as how I felt reading the novel. Again, like I said, it was my first time reading something where it's not very clear like who's talking and you need to keep up or, like I said, get left behind. So I found myself multiple times reading paragraphs over, reading sentences over, just to make sure I was clear on who was speaking. And the novel starts this way. So it really wasn't probably until the end of chapter 2 when I finally felt like I understood who the characters were and who was talking when. Like, you start to pick it up, but it definitely took a little while. In this moment, I do also want to talk a little bit about the differences as Sun and Jadine fall in love. One of which being that Sun feels he can rescue Jadine from her assimilation into white culture. Like, it's very clear that she wants to be white adjacent. And when Sun is viewing that, he's saying it as a wayward approach to who she is and where she's from. And he feels as though she needs to be saved from that narrative. Meanwhile, in the reverse, she feels the same about him. She's like, you need to, level up. You need to take your education more seriously. You need to take getting a job, a well-paying job, a well-manicured job more seriously. And that really comes to a head when they go to Sun's home. And so I do want to just play 2 clips of that and talk more in depth about them.
The people there are country people, but in a Bible Belt, very culture, and that she is somehow impure. He's going to rescue her. She, of course, has the same idea about him. She thinks that he's sort of a primitive throwback.
Yeah, because she knows she makes literary references he doesn't quite get.
He doesn't understand.
But he knows who he is. At least seems so. He takes her to where the town he came from.
Yeah, they fly to New York and they have a pretty good time, and then he takes her home to Elo. And for the first time,
Elo is an all-black.
It's an all-black little village.
Like Mount Bio.
That's right. And
I was just worried about that because people don't know there are all black.
Oh yes,
towns.
They're all black towns, and have been that way for hundreds of years. And the people there are country people, but in a Bible Belt, very dignified people, very tenacious, very loyal people with all sorts of connections in the family and so on. And he comes back there and brings to his town this woman he loves, this city girl, and then he has been loving that place and remembering that place and romanticizing that place all these years. And then suddenly he sees it through her eyes eventually. And she is bored to death there. And she does not find anything romantic or lovely there. It's a backwater to her. The people are ignorant, hopeless. They can't be as free as they would like to be in their love. And the people there have very stern responses to all sorts of social shenanigans. So for her, it's the pits. For him, it's heaven. So her job is to get him out of there. And all that support of all those mothers and aunts and women who traditionally nurture and protect the clan and particularly surround and suffuse them with love, she finds those women threatening to her.
So I'll stop there because I think it's really interesting. A few of the other notes I took, Jadine tries to do the same for Sun, but he's confident with who he is. Sun eventually sees his hometown through Jadine's eyes. The idea that people are ignorant and hopeless, for her, it's the pits. To him, it's heaven, which I thought was really fascinating because Sun had the chance to see this place where she grew up, and his main critique was, you're forgetting who you are, like you're forgetting your blackness. And when Sun got the chance to show her his home, her critique was, everybody here is dumb and the women here are threats to me, and because of that I need to leave. And I just thought that was fascinating because Jadine has a strong dislike of the women in his life and the women who have built him. And I'm gonna come back to that point, but I did want to make it here, at least plant the seed of it here. There's also the conversation on white women's tears and white women's guilt. I will say that it's always interesting how quickly victimhood is reversed to make POCs both perpetrators and criminals, particularly Margaret and the role she plays as a seemingly doting mom who wants her son to return home. We learn that Margaret converts her inner rage into a tool used against her son as an infant, poking him with items and burning him with cigarettes, which is likely why he has never visited her or Valerian in his adult years. In turn, she claims that Undine could have stopped her at any time, making Undine the criminal and Margaret the victim. I thought this was super interesting. In many ways, it was almost triggering because of the amount of white women tears that I've been exposed to before. So white women who take a situation in which I've been wronged or another POC person has been wronged and find a way to flip it so that they are then the victim. And I had something like this happened in my first job out of college, where I had a boss who was white, a white woman, and she was just always picking on me for little things and was relentless in her picking on me, and was relentless in the amount of tasks she would ask me to do. Like, it was not unusual for me to be working from 6 a.m. to midnight every day. And I eventually talked to an executive about it, a Black executive about it, and she was like, this is not right. I'm going to set up a meeting with you all to like hash this out. I was like, okay. I also wasn't really looking forward to that because in a lot of ways I was guarded. I was still so new to the workforce, and which would have much rather that exec be in the meeting with me as a moderator, but that's neither here nor there. We have the conversation, and I'm not even kidding you, in the first 30 seconds she starts crying, and this was like a little bit after everything happened with George Floyd, and her commentary became, I promise you I'm not racist. My entire family is Republicans, but we still care. And so that's what I'm thinking of as I read this moment of someone who has been wronged. In this case, it starts off with Margaret's son. Margaret is Valerian's wife, a very much younger wife who doesn't come from a super affluent background. And their son at this point has not visited them in years, and it's a huge question mark as to why. Valerian is pretty indifferent about it, and there comes a climax in the book where everything just kind of spills out, and Valerian is instantly in this state of shock, awe, and remorse that he was never able to see the signs in his son previously, or signs that he saw he never took as a signal towards something else. And so post this event, and post the aftermath of this event, Margaret approaches Undine and comes with this narrative. And I just think it's really interesting, because at what point would you expect someone who is the help to intervene in a situation with you and your child? Like, that's just not a realistic expectation. And it's fair to assume that even if that's something Undine had, she might have risked being fired. So I just thought that was interesting. The novel also explores no-contact relationships. We watch Valerian talk ill about his son throughout the entire novel until we reach the last few chapters. After he learns of Margaret's behavior, words suggest that Valerian has an aha moment that forces him to reflect on the negative ways in which he's characterized his son, going as far as suggesting that he needs to talk to his son soon. But it's unclear to the reader if that ever happens. Throughout the novel, you see Valerian have a very negative perception of his son, even going as far to apologize to Jadine for some of the things that his son said to her when they were growing up, when they both were in school. And in the way that he characterizes him, he often links him to the bad traits he sees in his own wife. And he ends up doing this whole narrative of like, when my son was growing up, I would come home, he would always be hiding in the kitchen sink. I had no clue why. And you start to wonder as a reader, why would you not ask him why he was doing that, especially if you saw him doing it all the time? And it is in that climax where he learns that that's the reason, like his mom was abusing him and that's the reason. But I do just think it's interesting of like how he has this aha moment of, okay, I need to reach out to my son. I need to like have this connection point now that I know the truth. And again, it's not made clear at all if that happens by the end of the novel. By the end of the novel, in fact, you see Valerian's health significantly declining. He seems less lucid. And so if there was a point where he connected again with his son, you don't really know as a reader. The expat culture throughout the novel is also interesting. The way Margaret asks for provisions that are not native to the island for her Christmas dinner, and the rage and annoyance expressed by Undine as she attempts to source the proper ingredients for their Christmas dinner. Margaret was like, I want a turkey, I want apples, I want to make pies, just all of these things that were not native to the island that they were staying on. And Undine is understandably upset because it's, again, this lack of acknowledgement that like, we are not in Philadelphia anymore. We are literally on an island that does not have these provisions. That and Valerian's high turnover and maintenance staff suggest that Valerian and Margaret have no desire to assimilate with the island, but would rather continue to find ways to duplicate their lifestyle and conveniences from Philadelphia into their new home, something that seems prevalent among present expats and the way in which they colonize new places. That line for me, the line that I wrote, opens up a lot of conversations, because I think there's a conversation that can be had on transplants, nationally throughout the United States, but I think there's also obviously a larger international conversation on the amount of folks that leave America to go live in new countries for whatever reasons. It could always be something different, but I do just think that's interesting because in a way you are colonizing a brand new space, and that's absolutely what Valerian and Margaret were doing. And instead of them even trying to learn more about the place that they were living or trying to have a connection with the folks that live there, even going as far to maybe actually remember Yardman's name, Yardman and Mary, Gideon and Mary, you can just tell that that's not of interest to them. Like, they wanted to take their exact life in Philadelphia and replicate it in this new place. Finally, I can't help but say where the conversations explored at the end of the novel that discusses the role of a caregiver, particularly caregivers in Black families. It reminded me of my own experiences with my late grandparents and the role that the adults around me played in caring for their former guardians who did the same. One quote struck me most on page 283. "I can't explain nothing no more. It didn't used to be this way. Seemed like folks used to take care of folks once upon a time. Old Black people must be a worrisome thing to the young ones these days." The quote left me with the following question. As we, Black people, grow older, how do we continue to center the concept of care and community with our elders? This quote is also Undine's direct response to Jadine's unwillingness to watch over her family and in turn take on maternal nurturing characteristics. If you remember that point that I said, put a pin in it, particularly how Jadine hates how nurturing those women that helped build Sun are, and she sees them as a threat. To me, it came full circle. Like, it makes sense why she would not want to take on a maternal role to take care of her aunt and uncle. Like, she makes it very clear that that's not something she wants to do, and that she doesn't even want them to put that pressure on her. And I just think it's fascinating because she spends a lot of the novel saying how much Undine and Sydney mean to her, and then when it comes to this point of, will you essentially take care of us, will you find a way to take care of us, it's just like, please don't put that pressure on me now. Like, that's not the type of woman I want to be. And I just think it's interesting because that comes up so many times, that like a nurturing characteristic is just something that she really does not want to have. And I'm not saying that's a bad thing. I just think it's fascinating to explore, because to the second question of like, as Black people get older, how do we care for the elders? Like, and if you don't grow up in a way that teaches you the beauty of Black families that take care of one another, I think it's really hard to then develop that skill in later life, or to even develop that understanding in later life. It was so interesting. I remember doing a trial with a new therapist, and I was telling her, I'm the eldest daughter, I was telling her how I typically go home once a year for a month to take care of my younger brother so my parents can go relax and be free. And I was explaining that while I genuinely enjoy giving them the chance to be free and have time to relax, it's also like very tiring for me to do it. And her initial response was like, well, why would you do it? Why do you have to do it? And I just thought that was so fascinating, because I was like, this is clearly someone who has never had to like sacrifice something for their family. Like, clearly that's not a concept that you understand. It feels novel to you. Like, this is not something that you're used to. And I just thought that was interesting, because she was also a Black woman. So it's like, there are recipes that are not being passed down. And again, that might be a conversation for another day, but that is something that came up for me while I was reading. The lessons and reflections are still following me post-read, clearly, but I'll leave with some of my favorite quotes from the book. "I have to cry about this," Valerian thought. "I have got to shed tears about this, but not water, please God. May they be blood. You should explain it to somebody. 2 people are going to starve so your wife could play American Mama and fool around in the kitchen." Page 205. As soon as a man or woman did something generous or said something bold, pictures of their funeral lines appeared in the foreign press. Page 167. What the hell did he say his name was? And even if she could remember it, would she say it out loud without reaching for the leash? Page 159. That's my review on Tar Baby. I hope you enjoyed it. I'm going to keep doing these for the books that I read. I honestly think mainly just so I can remember what I read and what points resonated with me, but too because this just feels like a place where I can have a personal diary of this type of information. So, hope you enjoyed it.